Please welcome Peta Charles.
Okay, bit of a heads up, I've got a lingering. Were you pointing to me for some reason?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question before you started, if that's all right, Peter. Sorry.
Yeah.
I am really interested in this, of course. So I was wondering whether to take notes, or I was just going to say, are you going to give us somewhere to go for information, or will there be something you're handing out?
You're going to get resources at the end, and I'm happy to share the presentation around if you want it afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Just absorb, listen today.
All right, thank you.
I'm just going to say up front, I've got a lingering cough that's sort of hanging around from a cold I had 2 weeks ago. I hope I'm going to work okay today, but we'll see how we go. So, first thing I want to make very, very clear from the start is I am not a heritage expert. I'm not a historian and I'm not a heritage architect. I am simply a town planner. Now, there's a lot of people out there that are probably going to be going, why is a town planner talking about this stuff? Well, in Brisbane, if you're in a mapped traditional building character overlay, which is the purple area you can see there, and if your house was built in or before 1946, it is protected. So you're limited in terms of the demolition work you can do. If it's then built before 1911, it's extra protected and you're extra limited in terms of what you can do. Now, my business, I would say at least half, if not maybe even 75% of my business, is focused on renovations and extensions to houses in those purple areas. So I spend the bulk of my day analysing houses to work out which side of the lines they fall and therefore what my clients can and can't do. So I'm definitely not an expert, but I have a little bit of experience playing around in this space. Today, we're going to focus on Brisbane because it's what I live and breathe, but the principles that I'm talking about here can just be picked up and applied to pretty much any other place. So I'll talk about Brisbane City Council's archives, just pick it up, Noosa archives, Toowoomba archives, whatever the version is in the area you're looking at. Now, like Peter suggested today, I've only been given 20 minutes, so it's going to be very high level. I'm going to give you some insight into how I sort of approach a house staging exercise, and then, like we suggested just before, give you a bucket load of resources so that if you want to continue the learning process, you can go away on your merry little way. So, a few things you need to understand up front. A lot of my clients come to me and they just say, oh yeah, I expect you can access council system or access some database and it'll give you the answer straight away. That would make my life a lot easier. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So, firstly, first point I want to make is it's usually a balance of probabilities type exercise. So I'd say 95% of the resources that we have access to are not what we call A-grade resources. They're not black and white, you can't 100% trust them. So an example I'll give you is the postal records. You had to pay to be in the postal records and you had to be home at the time they came around trying to register everyone to get into the postal records. So just because you're not in the postal records doesn't mean that the house didn't exist back then. So it's a case of getting all the puzzle pieces, putting it together and going on a balance of probabilities. We think it was built before this date. Which kind of leads to my next point there. It is very rare to get an exact date of construction. It's usually a date range. So for example, the field surveyor's books. You might go through and you work out the first survey occurred in 1920. Second survey occurred in 1928. And you can't find any other resources to fill in the gap. 1920, 1928, that's your date range. It's very rare to get an exact number at the end of the day. Linear. This whole process, you'll start here, and you come over here, and then you'll come back over here, and then you'll end up there, and then next time you try and do it, you start out there, and then you end up there, and there is no set process to following this whole process. It's, you just see where you go, see where you end up type thing. Sometimes you just cannot get the answer, and it drives me insane. I've had a massive run of houses recently. We've been working with a heritage expert. Got to the end and it's like, we think it's pre-1912 and that's as much as we can get. And you sit there and just go, oh, come on, we're so close to that 1911 date in that situation. So, and then last but not least, relocators. Houses that were built elsewhere, particularly prior to 1911, and picked up and moved over to this property, hold the same level of protection as a house that was built on that property prior to 1911. And the resources, most of the resources we look at, obviously aren't going to work for a relocator. So, the moral of the story, or the point I'm trying to get across here is, you need to approach this process with an open mind. You need to be flexible, nimble, and just go with the flow and see where it takes you. Don't think you're going to get exact answers straight away, because it just does not work that way. Now, as a town planner, I follow 3 key steps. First and foremost, like I mentioned, you can head in a million different directions. You've got to narrow your focus to start with. So the way I do that is I analyse the house styles. So every set time period has very distinct features to it. So for example, if I'm looking at a house and I can see it's got the cross bracing on it, or it's got wrought iron balustrade on the front, if it's got sash windows which open up, if it's got doors which have low handles, it's going to be pre-1911, I can tell you up front. If you go to a house and it's got multiple gables fronting onto the street, if those gables have built-in timber detailing as opposed to floating, or floating is the best way to describe it, floating timber detailing, and if you've got casement windows that open like that, or if you've got high door handles, 1920s, 30s to a T. If you go fast forward and you've got a house that doesn't have a veranda on the front, and it doesn't have central hallways, that is after the war, because they didn't have much money, they were really tight, they didn't want frilly stuff around the house, occupying space in these houses. So just based on the features of the house, you can start to go, that is the direction I'm running in, or that is the direction I'm running in. Now, a couple of warnings there. Just like today, people do hold on to styles of the past. So you will have some people that go, I really liked that cross bracing, or I really like that wrought iron, I'm going to carry it through to my 1990s house. So you need to account for that factor. And then also there's repurposing of materials. The most obvious one is the old verandas, they're getting closed for sunrooms. So you'll see a lot of pre-1911 houses which have the casement windows on them. Don't get fooled by that. So you've got to analyse the whole house and focus on what are features that are hard to change. It's hard to change the roof form, it's not hard to change a door in the house. So focus on those bigger sort of features. 3 resources if you want to build your knowledge in terms of this space. The Yellow Bible, we call it in the industry, by Judy. Unfortunately, I've been told she's no longer publishing. You've obviously read it.
No, Windsor Society bought the last of her books in bulk, and that's just sold out. So
I heard a rumour she
it's
has...
out of print now. Yeah, she passed away, unfortunately.
Oh, there you go.
So yeah.
Yep. Well, no one taking his mine. But Brisbane City Council's library archives, they've all got copies, so you can access it there. Next is we've got a fact sheet that talks about pre-1911 features to look for. So if you go to our Instagram page, go to the link in bio there, it's the second link on that page there. Now I know a lot of you won't have access to Instagram. Peter, he can share it around with you at the end there. But basically it's just a 2-page fact sheet which says, hey, look, if you've got this roof form, this balustrade, these windows, odds are it's pre-1911. Oh, but hold on a sec, if you've got those windows, odds are it's not pre-1911. So that's a resource that I've created. And then the final one is Marianne, aka the House Detective. She has been one of my biggest inspirations in the space and I've learned a lot of her. She actually conveniently for me did a video on this topic last week, I think it was. So you can jump in onto her YouTube channel or her Facebook page or Instagram page and go check that out. Now, number 2. Next step, just because it's such an easy, quick step to do, is to go to Brisbane City Council's interactive mapping, search for the property, and turn on the 1946 aerial photo. And you want to see if your property is in that 1946 aerial photo. So if you've gone, okay, based on the house styles, it's 1911, it's pre-1911 for sure, then you go to that 46 aerial photo and it's not there, whoa, it could be a replica or it could be a relocator. So before you go to the effort of going down the pre-1911 path, just do that quick little check to make sure you shouldn't be going off in a totally different direction. Now you start the puzzle game. So, puzzle pieces, aka resources that are out there for you to be able to tap into. There has been massive advancements in this space in the recent years. Like it feels like every single year a new resource comes online that we can access digitally as well. So I've kind of broken them down to categories today. The first I want to focus on is lot creation resources. So they're things like the historical title search. So you can go and work out when the block was physically created. Or the estate maps, the brochures that were created for the sale of these estates. You can go in there and go, okay, the property was put up for sale in that date, therefore it means the house, generally speaking, should have come afterwards. Unless it was the original farmhouse, that's a bit of an anomaly. But yeah, you focus on when was the block creation created, and then in theory, the house came after the block was created. Next lot of resources is lot occupation resources. So we're looking at things like postal records, electoral records, sewerage connection records, records that show that there were people actually physically on that property. You assume if there's people physically on the property, there's a house around the people on that property. Next, sewerage creation resources. Now, when I tapped into this stuff, it really blew my mind because I grew up just having this idea in my head that The sewerage stuff in the city came about through Clem Jones. It was more in the 60s, 70s, 80s type period. But you go back to 1910, and that's the first record I'm aware of, and clearly there's probably more out there. But 1910 is the first instance where Brisbane City Council, Metropolitan Water Board decided that they wanted to sewer the city. So what they did between 1910 and 1911 is they sent the surveyors out there to crudely, I use that term loosely because it wasn't too crude, but to crudely map the entire city as it stood at that point in time. They used individual squares for individual houses that were isolated in big areas, and they used hatching for clusters of houses. So in theory, you open up this record, the the contour plan, and if you see an individual house, which matches up with where your house is today, it was there in 1911. If you see cross-hatching, then it's a sign that there was most likely a house there at that point in time. If you see nothing, odds are there was not a house. I do stress this is one of those resources that has a lot of human error in it. So you take it with a grain of salt, balance of probabilities again, you put it into the puzzle game and you go, that might help me build this case here. Then, so they took a year to go around the city, map it all out. Then they went, yep, let's make this project happen. So then they sent all the surveyors out to individually draw each house to the point of, there's a water tank here, there's a little fire stove there, there's a brick fence over here. Like the detail on, especially on the earlier ones, is incredible. Now that process went from, I think, 1911/1912 through to the 70s. They had to stop multiple times because of the war efforts, the money was redirected towards fighting wars. But if they paused it for a long period, they then had to come back and remap the areas. So if you go and look at like field surveyors books, you can see they use different colours for different surveys. So you can see, okay, black was the original ink. That was, let's say, time-stamped 1916. Then you see some blue additions to it in 1925 or whatever the date is. You then get this timeline of how the house has evolved, let's just say, in that period. Then what they did is they collated all of the individual images for all of the houses and they put it onto one map, which is called the detail plan. And you can access that digitally. Building records. So we have building registers from, I believe it was 1904 through to 1945. They are available digitally online, but they're really hard to interpret because it's all done chronological. So here's the 1910 book, and we started at the first entry was Arthur Street or something like that. And then it was Albert Street, then it was back to Arthur Street. And next page you go through and it's B's and then C's. So you've got to work out when you think the work occurred, and then find that book, and then find your street. I don't personally use them, I never have, but I know that they exist. So that's one of the very first records we have. There is a few books that are missing out there, unfortunately, not all books have been retained. Then we moved to building cards, so thankfully then they went, okay, instead of having one book for each year with everyone registered in it, let's get an individual card for each property. Unfortunately, they're not publicly available through digital means, but you can go to Brisbane City Council's archives, get a hold of those, and it will list all of the work that's occurred post 1945. That then takes us up to roughly, I think it's 1982, 84, 87, I get mixed numbers there, but roughly the 80s when we moved to digital systems. So then you can go through Brisbane City Council, you can do a history search, and you can access the information that way. And then we move through to the modern day, which is Development I, which you can just go in, type the address in, get all the history from 2004 onwards. Aerials, 1936 is the first aerial that's publicly available through just jumping online. There are aerial photos definitely that exist prior to that date, but that's the easiest one you can access. Photos, you've got like Corley Explorer, you've got all those other websites that show the house front on. Google Earth Pro is another good one. That's an aerial photo, but if you zoom in on an angle, you can often see like the side windows or a side deck or something. So there's a bit of a way to play with that one. And then there's what I call lucky dip resources, which is basically you turn up to your historical society or you turn up to the State Library Queensland and go, what do you got for me? What can you give me on this property here? And you just go in and see what you're lucky enough to find. Now, yesterday when I sat down, I went, okay, I've got to create this slide deck, I've got to create a presentation. I went, how do I get all of this information out of my head in terms of all of these resources? Like I've just run through a handful of what's out there. So what I came up with was this table. And again, if you go to our link in bio and an Instagram page, the very first link at the top is this table here. It's just a single page document. Now, what I've tried to do here, and hopefully it makes sense, I've categorized it. So we've got lot creation, lot occupation, sewerage, all of those categories I've just talked through now. I've used a color coding system to explain whether it's freely, readily available online, whether it's freely available, but you've got to put in the time to go to archives, or you've got to put the time to go somewhere to access it. And then red is the ones where it's like, no, you've got to actually pay for it. So in terms of if you're looking for something that's a easy to access free option, you go the green ones. If you're looking for something that's going to give you a higher chance of success and a bigger hit, you go the paid options, the red ones. Depending on your personal preference, your purpose, all of that sort of stuff dictates which way you go here. Then I've got the time periods that those resources cover. Then what I've done is basically used asterisks to mark where that resource can help you. So each one of those columns is, like I said, the different pathway you're going to run down. You've established in step 1, we are pre-1911. Okay, so you're going to go down this pathway, that's that first column there. Then, what I tried to do, asterisk is yes, the resource applies. Dashed line, the resource doesn't apply. Question mark is, not sure, haven't played around with that resource yet. And then the numbering is, okay, if I'm tackling a house, if I know it's pre-1920, I'm first starting, if we go back, engaging a heritage expert. That's the first place to start if you can. Then number 2, I'm going to go down to detail plans, which I mentioned before was the field surveyor's books collated into a single image. So I've used numbering to indicate which steps I generally take. But again, I go back to the beginning, you've got to go with the flow. You've got to be ready to go in any direction depending on what you come up with resource-wise. So, like I said, that's available for you guys to download. In terms of resources, we've talked about link in bio to get the pre-1911 fact sheet, to get the table I've just talked about. If you go to our YouTube channel, we've got playlists which are called like How to Date a House playlist, the pre-1911 playlist, and the online tools playlist. Online tools goes through things like Call the Explorer, Brisbane City Council's Development Eye, how to use that, gives you some information. In terms of our Instagram page, so we don't have Facebook anymore, unfortunately got hacked last year, but our Instagram page, we try and do monthly post on Trip Down Memory Lane, where we talk about some of the stuff I'm learning through my job. And then there's a heap of other stuff we post on. And then, like I suggested before, House Detective, she has amazing Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube channels where she's always sharing all of this information. Final comment is just to reinforce what I said at the beginning. I'm not a heritage expert, I'm just sharing with you today how I as a town planner tackle this stuff, because it's something that I have to do every single day. And then we threw the question time.
And Melissa, you didn't even have to ring the bell.
I didn't, no.
You lectured me so hard, you were
Can you all just thank Peter first before Can I say that was probably the most rapid fire thing I think you've ever done.
I think she did it on one breath.
I'm pretty close, eh? Okay.
It was like beat the cough, don't start.
Any questions?
Oh, right.
Gavin.
So the development eye, it's relatively new though, isn't it? So
2004 onwards,
I heard that the council struggled to upload everything.
100%.
So what happens in that?
So you basically don't get access to the chitter chatter that goes back and forth, you just get access to the key documents. So the town planner's report, code assessment document, proposal plans, and then typically maybe the information request, and then usually the approval documents at the end. At the moment they are reluctant to overload the system because they're worried it's going to crash, so they're holding back that other information.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But you can pick up what's happened based on those 3 key stages. Yeah.
Any other questions before we let her take a breath? Yes, ma'am.
Have you thought about something you were talking about, sewage connection records?
Yes.
Have you thought about, do the Brisbane City Council archives have their electricity connection records? Because that was something I was just thinking of, because a lot of houses had electric light before they had sewage, and I was thinking to myself, that would be actually a good resource to actually tap into to see if they actually have the connection records of when the council connected houses up to electricity.
I don't think I knew about.
No, but that was I was just thinking of that's actually another resource, because then that goes back further, especially in the 1920s, a lot of houses were advertised as electric light, but no sewage. Like my house is an example of that. It had, it was built in 1927, well, 26 to early 27, but basically it came with electric lights, it had electricity, but didn't get sewage until 47, so. I was just thinking that's actually another resource to think about.
100%. So one of the things, if you go to Brisbane City Council's archives and walk in there, like I suggest, and go, what have you got for me?
Yeah.
You'll find sewage connection information, drainage plans, valuation records, rates ledgers, all of this other stuff. It's
Yeah.
not going to apply to every single property, but if you walk in there and go, what have you got? They'll hand you whatever you do have. The best example I had is a few years ago, I had a client in Newmarket and we found the drainage plan, and there was a little note on the drainage plan. It was 1947, it was dated, and so we saw the house there and we're like, oh no, the means going to be pre-1946, that doesn't help our case. And then we saw a little note in the side corner that said roof still to be added, or roof under construction or something like that. And we're like, yes, it's post-1946, it gives the client what they want, like it worked. So you be open-minded, you don't know what you're going to find. Yeah. But that's, you may find that exact thing there.
I was just thinking, just you were talking about the sewage, and it just dawned on me that the council supplied electricity at the, well, I mean, there was two, but the council, around where I was anyway, the council connected the electricity to the area, so.
Something that we should point out is, Peter mentioned the house detective for about, is it 6,000, her top level thing?
Something like that. If you go to her website, she's got all the different levels of
Yeah, for her
service.
very top level, 6,000 or so, she will tell you literally everything she can find, sometimes which is mind-blowing.
Oh yeah, she's very thorough.
She's
like
incredible.
you pay for a very quality plan.
Yeah.
So, we in the industry depend on Peter's knowledge often because, like, even though we may know stuff, she has access to more, like her postal records. Like she got hold of the lot.
I don't know, I've got those.
Yeah, so, but you know, these are very important, like the detail plans. Like some of us in the industry, we love those things. I downloaded a lot of those too. But just recently, she's put up a Instagram video on that very thing. She's repeated it. It was 5 years ago. And understanding how to use the detail plans, you need to watch her video because you can't figure it out otherwise.
There's a lot of interesting information. Like when I did that video, I found there's a fish pond on this property at Clayfield. I'm like, that's so cute, little fish pond. And I love the thunder boxes in the backyard. It's like they're my favourite thing to see, just lined up one after another. So you can have a bit of fun playing around the detail plans.
Yes, and if you ever look at them, they have on them the letter C. What the hell does that mean? It means closet.
Earth closet, yeah.
Yes.
So generally, when you're dating the house, it comes down just to the year. Generally speaking, is it you'll find out what the year is, or it might be between a couple of years, or does it usually get down to a month or something?
From a town planning perspective, most of the time we're just focused on the year.
Yeah.
I've had quite a few jobs where it's been December 1946, and then you are focused on the day. You're like, okay, when did that construct? Like, you look at the building cards and you find out it was approved in December the 1st, 1946. You're like, okay, did this start before January 1st the next year or not? So there are situations where you do get really fine-grained, but most of the time from a town planning perspective, it's just give me a general year.
So when you talk about, trying to get down to a day, are you talking about the completion or the start of construction?
From a town planning perspective, anything built before 1947 is protected. So I've had, again, situations where construction started.
Yeah.
So that's the case, okay, how much is there, what parts of the house are protected, what parts are not protected, and that feeds into which pathway you go down with the application.
Yeah. I want to date my house, so obviously I want to know also professionally for my clients, but for my house, because I want to give the old girl 100th birthday.
Yes.
So that'll be fun to find out. So I'll practice on my house and then I can do it for my clients.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I'd just like to show my ignorance. My question is, what is the importance of this information?
What is the importance of this information, Peter?
So multiple different ways you can use it. Like I've suggested many times from a town planning perspective, if you're looking to renovate or extend your house, that is a key factor in deciding whether you can remove components or not remove components under the exemptions. And so it dictates which pathway you go down in terms of renovations, extensions. You might want to look at just for the nostalgia factor, you might want to look for a resale factor, like I've seen so many resale adverts where they're like celebrating the fact that it's 100 years that it's been around, etc., etc. They're the obvious answers that spring to my mind, but can you think of any?
A lot of families want to know what happened to their house.
Yeah.
And if they had it at the time, they want to know more about it. Like Beverly has had people come here specifically looking for when there were photographs of their house, and then they related it back to when the house was built. And they go, oh, that was only 5 years after it was built. Oh, yay, we know when, so it matters. So getting the day of the house, the quality of the paint on it, it can influence, and see the photos, it all adds up.
Yeah, families who live there is a good resource of actually finding photos of the house.
Yeah, there's a couple of
Yeah.
points I put there. Number 30, family tree websites, and this one
Yeah.
Marianne gave me a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
She said you'll log in and you'll get a connection. Someone will say they're a relative of such and such.
Yeah,
You reach out to them and all of a sudden they go, oh, I've got photos for you. I can show you me standing out there when I was 5 years old, that type of thing. So that's an amazing resource. And another one I've got there somewhere is chatting to neighbours, elderly residents. The number of times on jobs I've gone back to clients and gone, look, it's giving me pre-1911 vibes. I think it was built in this time period. They end up talking to the neighbours and sure enough, come back, yep, 1904 it was built. So you'd be amazed at the wealth of information and knowledge that's hiding out there that you can tap into.
Richard, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, Peter, why 1911? Like, the house was 1912. Like,
So obviously as a community we have a lot more interest in protecting our heritage, our story, our history, all of that sort of stuff. Council for a number of years has been under a lot of pressure to add another layer of protection beyond the 1947-6 cut-off type period. So back in 2011 they decided, okay, let's introduce a new category, let's protect anything more than 100 years old.
Right.
Was it
2011 goes back to 1911,
Right.
that's where it starts from.
Right.
does that have anything to do with the contour survey though? Because that was done in 2019.
Contour survey popped up afterwards, conveniently.
Yeah, that's
It
what I
feels-
thought there was a connection there, because I was telling Peter, I was saying like, because he was saying 100 years old, and I was like, oh, but there's a contour survey from the same period.
But it's the same as 1946. Everyone goes, oh, it must be because there's 1946 aerial photo. That must be where it came from. No, because the cut-off's the end of 1946. That aerial photo was taken in May 1946, I believe. It is massive coincidence. I 100% agree. But the reason why I say no, and I could be proven wrong here, but the reason why I say no is I had a job going back maybe 9 years ago now, where we lodged it thinking it was a pre-47 house, being heavily butchered. It had no character left to it. We lodged the application partway through the assessment process. Council gave us a call, went, we've just added this resource and your house is a square on this contour plan. And we're like, what do you mean? Pre-1911, extra layer of protection, totally changed the direction we're
Yeah,
going.
and not everything that's pre-1911 is on that overlay either.
No.
Like, because I've seen way evidently older houses that have been demolished, that, you know, you can tell they're late 19th century, and they've been demolished, and you look at the history of them, like, yeah, they should, and you look, it's like, oh, something on the 46 overlay and not on the, you know.
That's something I really want to stress. Do not pay any attention to the 1911 overlay in Brisbane City Council's interactive mapping.
It's got nothing on it.
That overlay was created to identify the houses which council at the time of creation could 100% defend in court. So they had black, I mentioned before, it's very hard to get black and white A-grade resources. They are the ones where they had those black and white resources that they knew if someone was going to take it to court, they weren't wasting ratepayers' money by defending. I would suggest that's less than 10% of the pre-1911 houses out there. But it's the TBC, the traditional building character overlay, that purple overlay that actually protects them, not the pre-1911 overlay, totally separate things.
And our last question, I'll let Gavin have one in the corner.
So there's obviously those two key dates. Do you envisage an additional date being added, or is there any rumours that something else will happen?
I mentioned before, the public is growing interest in this space. Council's under a lot more pressure these days to protect more houses. So yes, there is a lot of chatter. Everyone talks about let's have a rolling date that moves forward each year. So 1946 then becomes 1947, 1948. Put yourself in council's shoes. How on earth are you going to police this stuff? How on earth are you going to try and manage it and work out, okay, we're having enough trouble trying to work out what pre-47 is. What if you then make it 47, 48, etc. It just becomes an absolute nightmare. But also, something you need to keep in mind with town planning world is preemptive demolition and issues. If everyone knows they've got this looming deadline coming up in a year's time, they're going to lodge an application to demolish their house, even if they didn't plan to, because they want to secure and protect their rights. So we're going to see a lot of houses being destroyed unnecessarily. So council needs to kind of weigh that up and go, oh, is it worth it, is it not worth it? Yeah.
Right. Thank you everybody for your questions, and let's just thank Ms. Charles again.